Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.
Keep my roach, and I listen to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast.
Indeed you are, people. Indeed you are. You listen to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. My name's Machel St. Patrick Hewitt, one half of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, and welcome back to another show. We've just released an episode of West Indies on 99.94 DM. If you've not got round to watching that one yet, myself and Santoki got together on the 99.94 DM podcast network to look at the Nicholas Pooran farewell and resignation, I should say. And we kind of looked at why we think that's happened, what happens next in West Indies cricket, and so on and so forth. So first things first, after you've watched this, go and watch that particular episode to understand what we think about Pooran's resignation. But it got me thinking. After we'd recorded that, it got me thinking. I said, I need to drop a new video on the Caribbean Cricket Podcast YouTube channel, and I need to look at this captaincy issue in a bit more detail, but not so much Pooran giving up the captaincy. Like, it is what it is now. We've covered that, but more so looking at the who takes over next debate. Because the more and more I think about it, the more and more I realize there is no one to take over really and truly. But before I get into it, before I analyze it and explain why, you can see the ticker tape at the bottom of the video. Do like, share, and subscribe to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast. We're still on that road to 4K. Last I checked, I think we're on 3,570 something. So we still got quite a way to get to 4K. But if you do like the content we produce, if you like the informative, detailed, analytical nature of it, the nuance of it, do by all means subscribe and share it with people you think would like Caribbean Cricket Podcast. You can find us at Carib Cricket on Twitter and Instagram, and you can support the Caribbean Cricket Podcast and become a patron for as little as $2, £2 a month. www.patreon.com/Carib Cricket to get some exclusive content there as well. But let me get into it. I spoke about how I want to look at this captaincy issue. This video should not go any longer than 15 minutes because the purpose of this video really is to kind of foster and generate debate. And by all means, get in the comments below to let me know your views. So let's deal with the easy part first things first. Who's going to replace Nicholas Pooran as T20 captain? Well, that's obvious. It's going to be Rovman Powell. That doesn't even require a lengthy conversation. Rovman is already the vice captain. Now, there is an argument to say that given our struggles in the format and our embarrassment in the T20 World Cup, given that Rovman's the vice captain, he's already part of that leadership group, which has to hold their hands up and say, you know what, we've got to all take collective responsibility for what happened in that T20 World Cup. However, in the same way how when Jason Holder stepped aside in Test cricket and Craig Brathwaite took over, like sometimes when your vice captain takes over next, things change for the better. I will never, no one can ever convince me or make me buy into the notion that a simple change of captain is all that's needed in West Indies cricket for us to suddenly go on an uptick and an upsurge. Am I willing to admit that it could maybe have some small tangible improvement? Maybe a couple of percent if we're lucky. But in the grand scheme of things, as all the while the system doesn't change, all the while governance doesn't change, all the while we have a set of dunces running each of the territorial boards in the region, and not all the territorial boards, some are actually quite good, but all the while we have a set of dunces as the majority of territorial board presidents, nothing's ever going to improve. And certainly that's therefore beyond the reams of a captain and a new head coach to try and make major change happen in West Indies cricket. That said, in T20 cricket, it's a no-brainer. It will be Rovman Powell. Has Rovman Powell performed well enough in T20 cricket to make his place in the West Indies T20 side a certainty? what, 6 out of 10 at best? But given the woes we've faced in T20 cricket, that's fine. I know that that argument doesn't necessarily have sound logic, but you always have to put everything in West Indies cricket in the context of what everyone else is doing. I'd give Rovman in T20 cricket a 6 out of 10, maybe at best. And in fact, actually, as I'm saying that, let me just sorry, people. This is I should have prepped this beforehand, but let me just check something on Rovman because I just want to double check that I'm not making this up in my head because I should have had these stats ready beforehand. Right. So Rovman in his last, boy, 6 out of 10. Yeah. Okay. Rovman hit some form this year in T20 cricket, particularly at the start of the year. Remembering that West Indies versus England home series, Rovman averaged 74 with the bat, scored one scintillating 100, strike rate of 193. We then went to India and Rovman averaged 48 across 3 matches with the bat, 150, strike rate of 179. Bangladesh then came to us. Rovman averaged 66 across that series, 150, strike rate of 178. So Rovman was in scintillating form at the top part of 2022. He has tailed off since then. When India came to us, that 5 match series, Rovman only averaged 15, strike rate of 110, top score 24. When New Zealand came, Rovman averaged 33, top score of 27 not out, strike rate of 146. And then he was poor in the Australia warm-ups and he was subpar in the T20 World Cup. I say World Cup in the group stages, in the qualifying stages of the World Cup. But over the piece in general, if you look over the piece, Rovman has been contributing in T20 cricket for the majority of 2022 and certainly the first half of 2022. So there can be no debate that the next T20 captain is Rovman Powell. I had already gone on TVJ in Jamaica and said that I thought Rovman would get his chance at some point in the future. This was after CPL, sorry, after Talawars won CPL. And I said, yeah, I think Rovman will get his chance sometime in the future. You can go to our Instagram channel, and I think the video is there, or maybe it's on my personal Instagram channel. I can't remember. But what I said at the time when I said I think Rovman will eventually become captain on the T20 side is I assumed that Nicholas wasn't about to resign yet, and B, I did just say that the only thing that hinders Rovman Powell from becoming a future West Indies captain is every time Rovman hits the international stage, he doesn't show the level of consistency that suggests his place is ever permanent. And that has particular relevance to the argument I'm going to bring when I look at the ODI side. However, like I say, kind of rewinding back to my original premise, in terms of T20, he's been about a 6 to 6.5 out of 10. Maybe some will say 7, but the latter half of 2022 has been 4. He's been about a 6.5 out of 10 in T20 cricket this year. He's vice captain. He's next. Cool. No debate. If you do disagree, however, get in the comments below and let me know why you wouldn't give the T20 captaincy to Rovman. Obviously, the Talawars won CPL as well under his captaincy. Now, ODIs. Now, here's the thing, people. I have gone on some channels. I was on Hits 92 FM in Jamaica a couple of days ago. I spoke about it with Santoki on West Indies on 99.94. And on both shows, I said, I suspect Rovman's going to get the ODI captaincy as well. However, I am not convinced that Rovman should get the ODI captaincy. And let's start first and foremost with Rovman Powell's ODI numbers. Rovman Powell has played 45 one-day internationals. He has 100 and 250s. He averages 23. His strike rate is 83. Take away Rovman Powell being the winning captain for the Jamaica Scorpions and the Jamaica Talawars for a minute. Just look at that as a player. Does a player with those stats, even in a team as subpar as the West Indies, does a player with those international stats deserve to even be in the West Indies side, much less captain the side? Strip all emotions away. Does he deserve to get in the side off the back of that? And then I said, okay, that's his career though. Maybe maybe he's having a bit of an Indian summer as of late, but he's not. This is Rovman Powell's last 3 series for the West Indies in ODI cricket, and they've all come this year. Away versus Pakistan, 3 matches, top score of 32, average of 17. Home versus Bangladesh, 3 matches, top score of 18, average of 13. Home versus India, 2 matches, top score of 13, average of 10. So that's Rovman Powell's last 8 matches, last 3 series, which all happened this year. And then by the time New Zealand came, he got dropped. What I want people to answer for me is, yes, Rovman Powell just ended as top run scorer in Super 50. Yes, Rovman Powell just captained the Jamaica Scorpions, who weren't fancied to win Super 50. He captained them to the title. What I want to know is this. Is that enough for Rovman Powell to A, get back into the West Indies ODI side, having literally just been dropped? And I'm willing, do you know what? I think it is. I think it's enough for him to get back into the squad. Is that enough for him to not only get back into the squad, but leapfrog anybody else who could be ODI captain and become the next ODI captain? My argument is no. I do not think that you can look at Super 50 and, okay, if you want to look at CPL and say, well, he's won 2 trophies as captain, therefore just elevate him to captaincy of the ODI team. Historically, Rovman has never been good in ODI cricket. The only times Rovman can realistically say he's been good for West Indies in ODI cricket is the World Cup qualifiers in 2018 that got us to the 2019 World Cup, where that's when he hit his one and only ODI 100. I think, was that against Ireland? And he averaged 45 in that tournament, right? Then Bangladesh came to the Caribbean, I think the following year, and he played 3 matches in that series, and he averaged 59. If we're going to be honest, that's pretty much the only times Rovman has been good for West Indies in ODI cricket. And note, and I say this with respect to Bangladesh, the 2018 version of Bangladesh, note that I said the ICC World Cup qualifiers and then home versus Bangladesh. There is no other side that Rovman Powell has performed well against, and by that I mean full member side, that he's performed well against in ODI cricket. So again, I say to people, is it enough that Rovman Powell captained the Talawars and the Scorpions to CPL and Super 50 titles respectively, and top scored in Super 50? Is that enough for him to leapfrog anybody else and become the West Indies ODI captain? I don't think it is. I think he's still going to get it, but I don't think it is setting the right precedent to give it to him. Now, some of you will say it doesn't matter if his stats are rubbish. Sometimes having a good captain is better than the stats that they are. Sometimes having a good captain is better than the meaning or the valid meaning of whatever their stats say. So people naturally turn to someone like a Darren Sammy. Let me just get some water. When Darren Sammy captained the West Indies T20 side, particularly in the latter part of it, arguably he had no business being in the West Indies T20 side because his performances didn't warrant him being there. But he was seen as such a good captain that we were able to basically have him in the side almost as a bit of a specialist captain. So again, I say to people, is that the argument you're coming with then? Are we saying that irrespective of Rovman Powell's outputs in ODI cricket, he gets into the team to become almost a specialist captain who occasionally performs because we need a captain? Is our need for a captain so great that we're willing to basically carry Rovman Powell in the ODI team with his previous history of poor performances, in ODI cricket? These are the questions we need to answer, and we need to answer them honestly. So that's the Rovman Powell debate. So then I said to myself, but if we're not going to take Rovman Powell as ODI captain, who else is there? And on this piece of paper, I've written down 5 names who could potentially captain the West Indies ODI side. Option number 1, and probably the most obvious option, is Shai Hope. Shai Hope is obviously our one and only genuinely top level batter in that format of cricket, averaging over 50. He just captained a weakened Barbados Pride Super 50 team to the semi-finals of Super 50, and arguably they nearly beat Trinidad to get to the final. But the point is, he captained them to the semi-finals, and it wasn't even a strong Barbados Pride side. It was a side missing enough players because they were all in Australia. Okay, is that enough? And did people see enough in Super 50? And maybe the Bayesian fans are the ones to answer this, or those of you who paid proper attention to Super 50. Did you see enough in Shai's captaincy and force of personality to suggest he's ready to be West Indies 50 over captain? And then here's the other part to that dilemma. Do we want to give Shai Hope the captaincy when he's already burdened by having to be the only batter who can guarantee hundreds in that format of cricket? Me personally, I don't want to burden Shai Hope with the captaincy. We already know that he's doing what he can do, and he's largely speaking producing, doing what he can do. Why on earth would we add the captaincy to that? We just saw what the captaincy did to Nicholas Pooran's form. It fell off a cliff. People will forget that at one point in time, literally like a year ago, Nicholas Pooran was averaging in the high 30s. Look what the captaincy has done to his form. Do we really want to take that risk with Shai Hope? So that's where my kind of stance is on Shai Hope. Then I looked at some other options. Lots of people have mentioned go back to Jason Holder. I'm saying absolutely not. I get it. I get why people would say it might be the best short-term approach to use. I actually get that. But Jason Holder was captain of the ODI side between 2015 and 2019, and we won a total of 0 ODI series and qualified for the 2019 World Cup by the barest of margins and should never have been there. I'm not blaming that on Jason Holder alone. What I'm using that point to kind of emphasize and amplify, is why on earth would Jason want to do it again? I feel that Jason Holder has now come to terms with and almost feels happier not being West Indies captain. He's starting to play a bit of franchise cricket. He's getting rested a lot more. He doesn't have to do all the press conferences. He now seems to have come, I think he's almost come to a kind of sense of perfect peace with not being the West Indies captain anymore. I get why people would want to turn to it, but I'm actually but I'm actually saying protect Jason Holder's peace. He don't need that drama in his life right now. And some may say, well, being captain of the West Indies is a statesman's position. You don't choose if you want to do it. If it's offered to you, you take it. So if the Cricket West Indies selection panel turned to Jason Holder and said, well, you know what, there's no one else, you have to take it, Jason Holder's probably a big enough man to say, well, boy, I've got to answer the call because they've told me to. But I do not believe that Jason Holder wants that anymore. And I don't think it should be given to him either. So who's left? Then I put down Kyle Mayers. Now, some of you may well laugh and say, Mash, what on earth are you talking about? But it's worth just reminding people that Kyle Mayers captained the Barbados Royals in both the 60 and then in the latter half of CPL. So clearly, the Royals have recognized Kyle Mayers as having captaincy potential. So I haven't seen his name bandied about by anybody. I'm not advocating for it either. I don't think it, much like the Shai Hope argument, Kyle Mayers is an all-format player, key for us in ODIs, key for us in T20s, key for us in Test cricket. Do we really want to burden Kyle Mayers with the white ball captaincy? Same argument that I said for Shai is what I'd say for Kyle Mayers, but it's just worth reminding people that Mayers has been a captain this year. So then you've got two after Hope, Holder, Mayers, and of course from Powell, you have two, and of the two, possibly only one left field decisions left. One option is Alzarri Joseph. Massive left field option. But the only reason I put Alzarri Joseph's name down is because basically he's probably the first name on the team. Apart from Shea Hope, he's probably the second name on the team sheet and most definitely the first bowler on the team sheet. So the only reason I've got Alzarri Joseph's name down is actually because he's one of the few players in the team who's guaranteed to play. I have no other justification for putting Alzarri Joseph's name down. But in case the selectors wanted to go left field and they didn't want to burden Hope, they didn't want to go back to Holder, they didn't want to burden Mayers, they know they can't guarantee that Rovman Powell even can stay in the side, then you would look at somebody like Alzarri Joseph and say, well, you're one of the few permanent members of this side. Do you fancy it? I would totally say no. And again, much like Shea Hope, I would say, boy, Alzarri, focus on what you already do and do very good, which is basically being our best ODI bowler. So I wouldn't give it to Alzarri either. Now, I had Brandon King's name down, but I'm just crossing it out. That's not realistic. So people, there's only 5 possible names that can be ODI captain. Rovman Powell, Shea Hope, Jason Holder, Carl Mayers, or Alzarri Joseph. And I put it to you, based on the arguments I've given you, to me personally, particularly in ODI cricket, none of them have a strong claim to being the next West Indies captain. Sorry, that's harsh. Shea Hope has a strong claim to being the next West Indies captain. So let me rephrase it. None of them are good options to be West Indies ODI captain. How about that? And I hope you understand why I'm using the word good. None of them I would burden with the poison chalice that is West Indies ODI captaincy or West Indies captaincy West Indies white ball captaincy in general. I'm willing to accept that Rovman definitely deserves to be the next T20 captain. But people, I turn it back to you now. Who would you give the West Indies ODI captaincy to? Of those names I've mentioned, who has the best argument to be the next captain if we assumed that they all wanted it? I guess that's the only best way to approach it. Or put yourself in the shoes of a selector. Who would you turn to out of those 5 and why? People, that's been another quick rundown of the Caribbean Cricket Podcast Show, looking at another topic in West Indies cricket. Like I said at the top of the show, please like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that jazz to increase the algorithms for this channel. Share this with people who you think would enjoy the content and would want to get involved in the conversations around this particular issue. And as ever, just get following the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, people. Your only place for nuanced, analytical, in-depth conversations on West Indies cricket. Until the next show, people, I'll see you soon.
We rule the cricket world. Now the rules seem coming.
Welcome to the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things West Indies cricket. By the fans, for the fans.